Hey everyone, welcome to the Sword tutorial. Let's get started with 3D Max. You may already know the drill here if you followed previous tutorials. We start here by pressing Alt W into one of these canvases. And we want to press L to be in the left orthographic view. With G, we can toggle our wireframe there in the background, that grid. But first things first, let's go over here to viewport configuration and crank that up to 4K. And this here, we want to have it at highest quality. And then we can apply and hit OK on that. Next, let's go over here to customize and let's go to our unit setup. Make sure it's centimeters, and also here in the system unit setup, you want it to be centimeters. And then under customize preferences, we're gonna make sure that the gamma here is off, which I think by default is off now. And here under viewports, make sure you have that selection preview highlight turned off, if you haven't already done that. Under files, let's make sure we have some auto back files here, maybe 20. And then here under our general and scene undo, we want to have it at 100 in case you want to roll back. So now let's start with the plane here. Let's just drag it in the viewport and press Control to make it the same side all along. And then let's just drag it here in the center. For now, you can just eyeball it. You can toggle the wireframe mode, by the way, if you press F3. Let's go over here to these plane properties and put it to one segment. And now let's drag our reference image on there. Fits perfectly because it's also square. And now would be time to save our max file, because that's basically the basic setup here. So I have a folder here, I'm gonna call it Sword, and same as the max file name. Let's take a quick look here at our menu bar on the right side. If you go here to the left, we have the primitives, and here, this is where we can put some modifiers. And if you don't see something there, it's because you need to go on Show Buttons. And then here, under Configure Modifier Sets, you can actually set them up. Just drag them in. And I would recommend you to drag in the same modifiers that you see here on my end, because we're gonna make some use of them. And then you have quick access to them. Let's start by dragging another plane in here. I'm gonna make it square again by pressing Control. And now I'm gonna put that to 110 centimeters, because that's the size of our sword here, the length. Let's go over here to the Move tool and let's right click here on these small buttons there, these arrows that are pointing down, and that will center it perfectly here. Now let's drag a little bit that plane back here so we have some more space there in front of the reference image. You can press Alt X to make it transparent. Right now we have that plane selected, the new one, where we have 110 centimeters of width. Let's select the one there in the background again, the reference plane, and toggle G so that we see that grid. And now I want to put it so that this part here of the reference image is pretty much in the center. You can eyeball that. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but that's gonna work for us here. And now the reason why we did that is that now we can go over here to the scale mode and scale these swords so that they fit exactly over that other plane where we defined the size for 110 centimeters. So let's shift it a little bit here to the left side, and now you can see we have it framed in here. And that is the size that we want to have here, 110 centimeters. On a second thought though, I think it would be better to move this reference plane here so that we actually have that part here of the sword in the center of our X and Y axis. So let's just move that down, and now we actually have that here perfectly centered, and that way we have more visibility here onto the top part. And that means that now we can start working here on that sword. I'm gonna save it once more. And let's just take that plane that we have here in the front and let's turn it into an editable poly. You can right click there on that plane and then it will give you the option. Let's select it here in the vertex mode, and I'm gonna go over here to the scale mode. And let's just scale that here all the way down on the y-axis so that we already have pretty much a base here for the blade part. So that looks good. Let's select these two vertex points here. Just make a selection and let's go back here to the move tool and let's leave it somewhere there. Let's go into edge mode. Make a selection here over these two edges and let's click that connect dialog button. Let's start by having 5 segments here, 5 connecting edges. Now it doesn't really matter if we want to move these edges. We can also be in the vertex mode like I am right now. And let's just place that a little bit more as we might need it here to shape that sword or the blade part of it. I'm gonna go over here to the scale mode and bring it down here on the y-axis. Go back to the move tool. Shortcut for that is W, by the way. And then let's have these two edges here and bring up the connect edge dialog, and I just want to have 3 edges on that. Let's go over here to the vertex mode again. Zoom in, and now let's scale that up a little bit more so that it's not just this perfectly straight edge there, but has a little bit of a curve. And what we can also do is press F3 to get that silhouette view here, which may also help to just produce better results here when it comes to making sure everything looks fine. Let's select this edge here. Let's go back to our move tool, press shift, and while we drag on the y-axis, we get a fresh set of edges out of that. Let's take these vertices here and follow that shape that we see on the concept a bit better. And now let's go over here to our edge mode again. Select these two edges and let's bring up the connect dialog. And I just want to have 1 edge in there. And now we can also go back here to our vertex mode again and make that follow our concept. Let's continue with rearranging this here. I want to have these edges here right where we have this band on the concept, and then let's make another edge connection here and bring it somewhere around here. Now let's do the same thing as before. Let's drag out some more polygons here, and then let's use our move tool to rearrange that a little bit here. And let's also grab these two vertex points here and drag it a bit on the x-axis here to the right side. And now let's go over again, do the same thing where we make an edge connection, but this time we're gonna have 2 edges in here to get a bit of a curvature there. So now on that side, I'm gonna drag that down here and this one to here. Let's go over here to where it says cut. We're gonna bring up our cut tool, and that allows us here to connect basically these vertices here right onto that plane. Let's go here to the polygon mode and delete that face that we don't need anymore. Back to vertex mode, and let's make a connection here. Select these two, click connect. And now I just want to rearrange that a bit here. I'm gonna press Ctrl and backspace to get rid of this edge. Get back here to vertex mode. And let's see how we best do that. I'm gonna go over here to our cut tool and connect it here with this edge. And now we can have a bit more curvature there, which I think suits it better. On the upper right, let's press left again so that we are aligned here with our reference image. And I'm just gonna drag a bit here on that vertex, position it a bit better. And now let's have symmetry mode on the y-axis so that we actually have that on both sides. If you see some weird stuff like that, you just have to put the threshold a bit smaller. 0.01 usually works great. And now I'm just going to collapse that. Go over here to our polygon mode and select basically all the faces that we have on it. And if you look here at our reference image, you can see how we actually have some thickness there, some volume. Well, obviously, it's not just going to be a plane. So what we're going to do is use the inset command. And I want to bring that down quite a bit here. 0.24 something. And it's a little bit messed up there at the front. We're going to fix that in a moment. For now, I'm just going to bring that down here on the z-axis, like so. And yeah, we have a few things to clean up, but most importantly, we have it looking like that now, where we have pretty much this inset part here. And now what we can do is go here into that back position and drag it on the x-axis. And I actually want to drag it also a little bit on the y-axis so that it goes down. And now we can go back to our symmetry mode on the y-axis, and you can see what we're up to here. We have a better looking sword shape. Make sure the threshold is 0.01 on the symmetry, otherwise it messes up the front. And now I'm going to use another symmetry modifier on the z-axis to connect the other side as well. Now let's right click that and say collapse to get rid of these symmetry modifiers, which at the moment we don't need. And let's zoom in here and select these vertices. Make sure you have them selected on both sides and bring it up here a bit. Let's do the same thing on these guys. And remember, we have 2 vertex points selected when we do that. And this one down a bit here. So now we have a bit of a twisted edge salad here. Don't know what to call that. Control backspace on these 3. And I'm gonna connect these 2 here with 2 extra edges. And just drag it a bit here to the right side so we have more curvature. Go back to vertex mode. And now I'm gonna connect that a little bit better here as we had it before. Maybe this one here, and then these guys here. And I think that's better as what we had before. So we're gonna use the symmetry modifier now just to also get the same down there at the bottom. And now let's zoom in here. I'm gonna collapse everything. And I'm just gonna go over here to vertex mode, and we have this vertex already there that all we have to do is drag out pretty much. And now we have this nice tip of the sword edge there, the blade. And for now, let's just leave that blade part and let's concentrate on another part here. Let's go over to our primitives and have a plane again. We're just gonna drag it here. This new plane is our current active selection. If we zoom out and press Control and select the one in the background, followed by Alt Q, we have an isolation mode for both. I'm gonna turn that new plane into an editable poly, and that allows us then to also, like we did with the blade part, to rearrange some of these vertices here. At the moment we only have 4, which is not enough, but let's just go over here to the edge mode and add another one. And then with these 2 vertex points here, let's just start to follow the concept. Gonna have a connection here in between these 2, bring that down a bit. And then let's go back here to our vertex mode, select this one, bring that up. And that's how we start blocking out what we see here on the reference image. I'm gonna go to the edge mode, drag some edges out of this one here while pressing shift, remember? And then let's switch that back here to edge mode to drag some further new polygon out here that we then can rearrange. And as before, let's have an edge connection here through this part, or I should say similar to what we were doing before. And really just a matter of rearranging that here a bit. I'm gonna drag more edges out here, pull that to the right side here, pull some more edges out here while being in edge mode, and also here to the top. And then vertex mode again. As you can see, it's a lot of switching in between vertex mode and edge mode. And now you see we have these edges here. I'm gonna select one and press on ring to get a ring selection that I'm gonna connect here with an edge that goes through it. And that way we have a little bit more here to work with. Rearrange that, bring that down to maybe here, and have another connection going through here. Oops, Control Z. And then basically follow along here with our concept. Let's take these two edges and also drag them out by pressing Shift. You can do that on multiple edges, not just one. And also make sure it follows our concept there in the background to a certain extent. Drag that out here. And vertex mode to shift around a bit here the position of that. And let's go back to edge mode here. Press Control so we have these two edges here selected, and then with Shift we drag out some new faces here. And then it's a lot of jumping around in between vertex and edge mode and really just rearranging. So it's really hard to comment on every single step here. But let's just look at what we have there in the background and put these vertex points and edges where they make sense and have a connection here also, so that we have a bit more of a curvature there. And let's take these two edges a bit more back up here. I'm gonna go over here to vertex and drag that a bit here to the right side. And then with that edge selection, we press Shift again and drag out some new polygons there. And like I was saying before, a lot of jumping back and forth here with the vertex mode. So now I'm gonna press Shift, drag out some extra edges here, align that on the Y-axis, and then Shift again and just drag it further south on the Y-axis. So now what we want to do is use symmetry, but first we gotta fix our pivot here. Let's go on Effect Pivot Only and put it to 0 here on the Z-axis. Let's get out of Effect Pivot Only and go over to our Symmetry modifier. And we want to have it here on the Y-axis. So now let's push that a bit out here so that it doesn't cover that blade part anymore, because as you can see, we want to have some depth on that, as seen here on the concept. So now what we're gonna do is right click on symmetry and collapse it so that we have one piece. So while being in border mode, we can then press Shift on that selection here for everything, center it back to X here on the alignment. And I want to also affect our pivot here and center it to X, so that now, once we get out of this effect pivot mode again, we can use our symmetry modifier on the Z axis. Sometimes you just gotta toggle through it till it does the right thing. And now we have this piece here on all sides. I'm just gonna take that selection that we have here on the top, and I'm gonna use FFD, the one that is 2 by 2 by 2, so that now we can use these control points here while we are in scale mode and give that a bit more of an actual shape here that is not just a pure block. And I want to do that mostly here in the front, so that we have a bit of this pointy shape there, and the back of it still has most of the thickness. Let's add FFD free modifier on top of it. Let's also go to the control points, and I'm gonna select the whole range here on the top and squeeze it a bit here on the x-axis. Let's collapse that whole stack. And now on edge mode, let's double click on one of these edges here, and that will make a whole loop selection. And I want to do that for all these guys here. So now with that active selection, we're just gonna bring it down a bit here on the z-axis and also push it a little bit more in here on the x. And now let's go back here to our symmetry modifier. The pivots are still in the right place. Let's do it here for the z-axis. And let me just turn that on and off to see what's wrong here. We got to go over here to vertex and take that vertex point and pull it out a bit, or else it's kind of messed up there. So that works fine. I'm actually want to have the threshold at 0.01, otherwise sometimes it welds stuff together that shouldn't be welded together. But for now we can just collapse that. Let's select both of them here, press shift, and then click on that little color box here. We want to put that to black. Press M for the material editor to pop up. I'm just gonna right click here and make it so that we see more materials at once, but we just need to apply one material here. So now it's time to work on the grip. And for that, let's go over here to our left orthographic view. Let's go over to our primitives, and we want to have a cylinder. And right now I have 18 sides on that. Let's go over here to rotate, and let me undo that. I want to have our angle snap on so that it does this on a 5-degree snap, and that way we can perfectly rotate it 90 degrees. So now let's go over here to our parameters and increase the height a bit. And we may also want to reposition a bit here. I'm going to pull it a bit back on the y-axis, give it a bit more height, and let's press Alt-X on it. And let's put that here to 0 on the z-axis. Now I actually want to have the radius a little bit smaller than we had it before, because later we're going to have these straps over it. I'm going to collapse that so that we have an editable poly. Make a selection for these two edges, and I'm going to make a loop selection. Press Ctrl and Backspace so that we delete that edge loop there on both sides. So now let's go over here to our vertex mode and select everything here on that object. I'm going to go over here to front orthographic view, go over here to our scale mode, and transform that a bit here on the x-axis so that it does not have the same radius all around. So now I'm going to go over here to our edge mode, make a selection here for these things, make a loop selection and delete them, Ctrl Backspace. And now with this selection here, I'm going to press Shift to make a copy while you drag it. Gonna change the position here of these vertices. I still want it to be kind of stuck there in that other handle that we have. But for now, let's go over here to Effect Pivot Only and center it so that we have the pivot here in the center of the object. Gonna go over here, and while using the scale on the Z and the X axis, make that whole thing a little bit bigger. Now I want to go over here to edge mode and actually add some edges back so that we have a bit more to work with here. Let's go over to polygon mode and make a selection here on that piece at the back and bring up the inset dialog. So let's have it like that and then pull it a bit here on the x-axis so that we get a bit of a bevel there. And as a next thing, let's get out of this polygon mode and just globally here on the whole thing use the scale tool to give it more thickness here on the x-axis. And back here to our left orthographic view, I want to go over here to our vertex mode and let's just select some of these edges here and shift them a bit more over here to the right side. Next, I'm gonna select these two edges here combined and just scale them here on the y-axis and a bit down here. And then these two here, I wanna scale them up. If you press F3, you get that wireframe mode. And let's have another set of connections here. I actually just want to have one. So let's also scale that. So we get that nice curve there. I'm gonna make another ring selection here. Add a loop and scale that up a bit. Okay, and as a next thing, we're gonna select that thing here at the front, that face, and give it another inset and push that a bit here to the front. Next, let's go here to our left orthographic view and let's create a sphere. I'm gonna have 32 sides on it, and let's go here to rotate and give it a 90-degree rotation here. Position it so that it actually fits there on the reference, and I want to scale it down a bit. And now we actually want it to be up there, so we're just gonna press 0 here on the z-axis, which automatically brings it up. I'm gonna make a copy of that piece that we made here, and I want to flip that basically around 180 degree while we are still here in that rotate tool. Let's go over to the move tool, and now let's just delete some of these edges that we have here that we might not actually need. So now we can reuse this object here. Go over here to the scale mode, and I want to scale it down on the y-axis. Push that over here, and again transform our y-axis here. Bring that all a bit together. Basically, we're looking at the top of the snake head here on our reference image. So while we're looking here at the top of it, we also have to consider how it looks from the side. So we're gonna make an instance here, not a copy, but an instance. And this one we want to rotate 90 degree here, so that now when we work on that perspective here at the bottom, we also change it at the top at the same time because it's an instance. And I'm just gonna use FFD free modifier here. And that's already it. We can collapse that and we can delete that here at the bottom. I guess it only collapsed the modifier at the instance. Anyways, we are okay with that. We can reshape all that in ZBrush later. So for now, let's start with another cylinder here. And let's get another piece here in place. I'm going to center that here on the z-axis. And then the radius, I'm gonna increase it a bit. And essentially, if we go here to the wireframe view, we want to have this element here intersecting with that block out of the snake's head. And as a next thing, let's take that sphere that we have there at the back, and I'm gonna press Shift to make a copy of it. Not an instance. We made an instance earlier, so gotta make sure not to, by accident, have an instance. And now I'm gonna isolate that here together with the reference image, just so that I see better what we're up to. And I'm gonna use the FFD3 modifier here and add FFD4 on top. And then here with our scale tool, get a bit of a shape in there that resembles this head from the RAM. Once again, the FFD modifiers are very useful for something like that. And essentially, we don't have to be perfectly accurate here because we're gonna do the majority of the sculpting in ZBrush, where we also have move tools and all that. But let's just get some basic shape here. For example, this here, let's add another FFD modifier. And let's go over here to those control points. Actually, I'm gonna select the ones here on the side, left and right side only, and then on the x-axis. And that's already enough for this piece here. Gonna collapse this, the FDD modifier, and now let's take another look here at our sword blade, where we still have a bit of work to do as well. And let's just go over here to the polygon mode, and we actually still had that selection active. What we actually need is only half of that, so I'm gonna press the Alt key while I drag that selection to basically deselect these faces. So now we should have this selection here, and I'm gonna go over here to the back view and add an FFD modifier so that we better see what we're up to. And it's gonna be the FFD2 modifier, and we wanna have the control points here at the bottom selected. And now we can drag that here on the x-axis so that we get a bit of an angle there. And now I'm gonna collapse that down to editable poly, go back here to our polygon selection and click that auto smooth button on our active selection. So now we have one smoothing group here. And then I'm gonna select one of these edges here, make a ring selection, press Ctrl to convert it to polygon, and also auto smooth it. So now I want to add a few manual support loops here. Let's select these edges, go on our connect dialog, and I'm gonna have 2 extra edge loops here. Which, if we go over here to vertex mode, we can drag them a little bit here to the sides. And I want to do the same thing here at the front. Also gonna have 2 edges or edge loops. Select these loops here and bring them a little bit closer here to that center piece, and the other one can remain where it is for now. Now I'm gonna have our symmetry modifier here on the y-axis so that we have this curvature or this angle also to the bottom. So now let's go back here to that selection. I'm gonna auto smooth it once more, and I'm gonna zoom in here, double click that edge, and press Ctrl backspace to get rid of this little edge loop that we don't need there. I'm gonna make that again here. Make a ring selection, and also here on that side. So now we have basically all these loops here. I'm gonna convert it to polygon and click auto smooth. So now we have this here pretty much set up so that we can work with our chamfer modifier later on. But let me just do one thing here. I'm gonna go on select object mode, Q, and make another selection here that, by the way, applies to both sides if we do it. Just to make sure that we have a different smoothing group here for that segment than the one on top. So now auto smooth, and you will see in a moment what that will result in when we add the chamfer modifier. But for now, we're not quite done yet here. I'm gonna go back to edge mode, double click here any one of these center edges so that we get a complete loop here through the center pretty much when you look at it from the front. And we want to bring up the chamfer dialog here, make it a little bit smaller here, and make double sure to uncheck that little mark here, or else it overrides our smoothing groups, which is really annoying. We don't want to do that. So now we have this extra bevel here in the center, which is better for our high poly to work with once we are in ZBrush. And you can see it doesn't look perfectly aligned. We're gonna fix that here in a moment. For now, let's select this edge here, or any edge there in the center, and make a ring selection and convert it to a polygon selection here. And just click Auto Smooth with an angle of 45, should do the trick. And now what we want to do is add an FFD modifier, FFD free, and I'm gonna select the vertex points or the control points here at the front. And then on the x-axis, we want to squeeze that together so that we get that nice pointy sword blade there. And let's see here from the top. I'm gonna do that also a little bit here in the center. Doesn't have to be all the way. It should still have a bit of this curvature. And most importantly, it gets thicker to the end of the sword blade. So now we can collapse that. And what I want to do now is zoom in here once more at the top. And this here is now a little bit messed up. So what I'm going to do is take this edge loop here, just double click on these edges and align it here on the Z-axis on both sides. So now it's time to add our chamfer modifier on top of that. And as you can see, we need to bring that amount down here a bit on the chamfer options. And also we want to set it here to triangular. Make sure minimum angle is unchecked, and from smoothing we're gonna have it to unsmoothed edges. And now if we add a turbo smooth modifier here on top, we get already a nice high poly model. But upon zooming in here, we do have some issue here. So I'm gonna uncheck both the turbo smooth and chamfer and go back here to our editable poly to see what's going on here, where the issue is. And I'm gonna go over here to target weld because I see we have some not so good thing going on here, and it's better if we weld it like that. So now if we put the modifiers back on and zoom in here, we can refine a bit the amount, and we want that to be smaller. Something around here, 0.05 works pretty well. Let's put our turbo smooth iteration here to 2 so that we have more tessellation. And now I'm going back here to editable poly, go to our polygon mode, make a selection here on these polygons, and I want to detach it as a clone. So now let's select that thing that we just cloned, and we can then add a shell modifier on top of that. Before we do that, I'm gonna go into isolation mode here, and I'm gonna make a ring selection here on these edges and collapse it. And the collapse button is down here. I try to avoid shortcuts so that you see what I'm doing, and sometimes I have to look myself, where is that stuff? So now let's see here about the inner amount. I actually gonna put it to 0 for now. Not quite done yet. Outer amount maybe 0.3, and inner amount I actually want to have it also intersecting to the inside, so I'm gonna have it here at something like 0.2. Bring the outer amount down a bit, 0.147, and what I really want is to have one of these elements here looking like a more a stripe. So I go back to editable poly, take these vertices here and make it more like a stripe looking thing. Go back here to our shell modifier, and now what I want to do is effect pivot and center it here, so that it's easier then to make some copies out of it. And I want to have it as an instance actually, and I want it to intersect. So I'm gonna make a bunch of those here. Now what we can do is if we press Control, we have 4 of these guys here. And we can just copy them also as instance. So now we have 8 of these. And let's just push it a bit here to the left. And I'm gonna select every second of them. Go over here to our scale tool and scale it up on the Z-axis and a bit here on the X-axis as well. So now it's not as perfectly straight as before, and it looks then more like a leather wrapping. I'm gonna also add our chamfer modifier on top, put it to triangular, and maybe have an amount of 0.08 and 2 segments. And I think that works pretty well here for that thing so far. So now let's do the same thing here on that handle at the back. But before I do that, I just want to put it all to a gray material again here, like we did before. Just nicer to look at for the time that we still work on it. And before I add these stripes here, I want to extrude out this element here to have a bit more detail there. And also just scale that here a bit on the X-axis, this whole piece that we have there. And now I'm gonna collapse that cylinder that we made earlier. Gonna go over here to Polygon, select that face, and I want to inset it. And then with that selection still active, we're just gonna drag it out a bit to have this bevel there. And let me just double check that everything sort of aligns here with our concept there at the back. And I think that looks okay. Now let's go here and make a ring selection on that element, make a connection here. And I should have just made 2 edge loops, but we can get 2 if we just chamfer that. Basically that splits it apart here with that chamfer tool that we have there. And now I'm gonna make another polygon selection here out of that and detach it. Detach as a clone. And then sometimes it's a bit tricky to actually select then this clone, but you can see we have it now. So now also a matter of putting the pivot to the center and going back here to our modifiers and adding the shell modifier on top of that. And I think it even remembered the thickness that we had before, but I'm just gonna fine tune it anyway here. 0.3 for the inner mount and 0.17 here for the outer. And then we make the same thing that we did before. We make instances. And I'm gonna select all 4 of them and also copy that over here, or instance it over here. And now one more here. Gonna just take that one individually. So I'm gonna take that last piece that we have, and this one I want to make a copy out of it, not an instance, so that we can change this here and make it a little bit bigger than the other ones. If that was also an instance, it would change everything from the other leather stripes that we have here. And those, I'm just gonna add a chamfer modifier as well here on top of it. Put the amount down. And let's see what that looks like. I actually quite like it with this little bit of a jagged look that it has. Let's just leave it like that for the moment and go back here to that center piece where I also want to have a chamfer modifier on top. Gonna have the amount to 0.06 and also where it says smoothing here, we want to have it set to unsmoothed edges. So now we can add a turbo smooth on top of that, and that gives us this nice little metal piece look that we have there on the concept. Just gonna scale it a bit here on the y-axis. Now let's go back here to our sword, and if you look at the concept, this is actually supposed to be opened there in the center of the blade. So I'm gonna go back here to our editable poly, go over here to our edge selection, select that loop, and I'm gonna connect it here with 4 connections, 4 extra edge loops. Go over here to our left orthographic view, and here at the end, or at the back of it, I also want to have 4 edge loops, just so that we have some more edges here to work with. And now what I'm going to do is press Control here to make multiple edge selections here, and I'm going to do it till to that point here. And I just want to jump back here into our vertex mode, make a selection here for these vertices, and I want to turn edge constraint mode on so that when we move that here, it doesn't actually change our geometry, it just moves the vertices. So now we can go back here to that selection and use the chamfer dialog here and bring that amount down here to 0.43. Should work. So now let's go into isolation mode, left orthographic view, and I'm gonna go over here to polygon mode and select these inner faces here, and then with that selection here we can just delete it. So now let's go here to our border mode. I don't want to have edge constraint on, so I put that back to none. And now while we press shift, we can drag out some new polygons here. Now let's align that here on the Z axis so that this is perfectly straight, and bring these edges here to 0 on the X axis so that once we add our symmetry modifier back on, we have that perfect loop there in the center. Let's collapse that. And let's go back here to that part which is still looking a little bit too low poly. So I'm gonna add an extra edge loop here in the center. Select both of them if you press Control. And then we're just gonna bring it here on the Y axis to the left so that we have some curvature there. Back in vertex mode, I want to take these vertices here, press Control to have multiple selections, and connect them. So now there's one thing to do. Let's go back here to our edge mode and make an edge loop here in the center, convert it to polygons and auto smooth it. And actually there's one more thing that I want to do. Let's go back here to that selection that we just had. And I want to go over here to our scale mode and bring that down a bit here on the Z axis and also on the Y axis. Not too much, but just enough so that we actually see that there is some depth in there and it's not just this perfectly cut off shape. I'm gonna have an individual selection here for that side and auto smooth it, and that will result in some nice chamfer and turbo smooth look here on that. Speaking of which, it looks a bit too soft. So what I'm gonna do is put the amount down to 0 on our chamfer modifier here. And that just gives it a little bit more of a hard edged look when we bring it into ZBrush later on. So as the next thing, let's work on that piece here, which I want to have as a separate element. I'm gonna take that here into isolation mode. And let's select these vertices here and scale them up a bit on the Z axis, so that we have a bit of this curve there. Now make sure we are in left orthographic view, and I'm gonna go back here to isolation mode and select these polygons here and this one here as well. So now we have that on both sides, and we can detach that as a clone once again. And now we need to actually select that clone. Like I said before, sometimes it takes a moment to actually get that selection. So here we have it. And now I just want to put the pivot here to the center of it so that it's easier to work with. And I'm gonna just drag it up a bit here, the whole thing. So now I'm gonna go over here to our edge mode, make a selection here on both of these loops that we have there, convert it to vertex by pressing Control, And then we can drag that here with our scale tool on the x-axis. So now I'm gonna go over here to our edge mode once again, double click this edge line here, and I want to chamfer it so that we have more curvature there. Give it 3 segments. And then here with our vertex mode and edge constraint, we can drag that back here a bit on the Y and the Z. If you press in that yellow rectangle there. So now I'm gonna go over here to our edge mode again. And I'm just gonna delete the one in the center, which we don't need. Now I select these two and bridge them. And I'm gonna do the same here, also bridge it. Now I'm gonna go here to our border mode, select pretty much what we have here at the bottom and cap it. So now what that means is we filled it with polygons, but they don't have any edge connections yet. So I'm gonna select these two, connect, and do the same thing here for all these that need to be connected together. And you can see how this weird black line there disappears, where right now 3D Max doesn't know how it's supposed to triangulate. So connecting that will pretty much close that and make it like it should be. And now we have one more open here that we also just need to cap. And that way we pretty much have this piece here already created. I just find it a bit too hard-edged looking, so I'm gonna make a chamfer here on these edges. And I would say 3 are too many. I'm just gonna have 1 here. That will do. And confirm that here. So now it's time to set up our smoothing groups so that the chamfer modifier works. I'm gonna select these 2 edges, make a ring selection that I convert to polygon, and press Auto Smooth. And now I'm gonna make another selection here on these edges. Also make a ring selection, convert it to poly, and also Auto Smooth it. So that way each one of these segments get their own smoothing groups. Gonna put that to triangular, bring the amount down. So now that we have that piece here on the top, we also want to have it at the bottom. For that we gotta fix our pivot, effect pivot, and on the Z-axis we want to have it at 0. And now we can use our symmetry modifier here, and we want to have it here on the Y-axis. So now we have it duplicated also to the bottom. And let's get back here to that thing where we also have to put our symmetry modifier back on the Y-axis. Sorry, I forgot that earlier. And now what we can do with that piece, which looks very ugly so far, we're just gonna add a turbo smooth on top of it. No chamfer modifier needed in that case. Gonna go back here to that element, and I want to scale it down a bit here on the Z-axis only. And just now I'm looking at the concept, and I'm not quite happy yet with how this here is actually supposed to have more of a curve than we have at the moment, where it looks very straight there. So I'm gonna go back here to our blade itself, and I want to take these vertices here and bring them up a bit. It's useful to press F3 so that we have that wireframe mode to look at it. Doesn't have to be too much, but enough so that we have a bit of a curve there. And now on that piece that we just made, we also have to compensate for that. I'm gonna just go over here to vertex mode and actually rotate these edges here. Oh, and I shouldn't be an edge constraint. Make sure not to be an edge constraint. This one I also want to rotate here, just so that these edges also follow a bit our path better than it was before. And that way we pretty much fix that. This is how I want to have it, so that we have some more of a curve there. And now that I'm looking at that piece again, I want to have these edges here selected once more, convert it to vertex, and scale it out a bit here on the x-axis, so that this is a little bit wider there on the top. So the same applies here to that in the center. Convert it to vertex and also scale it out a bit. I think that looks better than it was before. So let's put our symmetry back on. And now let's see what we have left. That piece here also needs a turbo smooth on top. I'm not gonna have the chamfer modifier here on everything. Really just turbo smooth on that piece here as well. And I'm just gonna double check that every piece here is at 0 on X and on Z. So I'm just gonna click through everything here. This piece here as well. So let's put our chamfer and turbo smooth back on here. And also that piece here, let's take it in isolation once more. I'm still not 100% happy with this here. I'm gonna make a ring selection here. Make a connection here through that. And add some extra edges here at the bottom. And with that selection active, I'm gonna drag it down. So with that we have a bit of an extra bevel there, which we didn't have before. So now that messed up a little bit the things here at the front, what we wanna do is basically just connect that here. And have another ring selection here through these edges, convert it to poly and auto smooth it. So now I think that piece is finally done. I'm gonna add turbo smooth as well on it so that it's better tessellated, not as low poly. And there's one last thing. I want to go over here to our primitives and create a box. Let's just drag a box in here. You can see the length, the width, and the height that I have there for it under parameters. Go into our left orthographic view, select this box here and put it here where we have it also on our reference. Like a small diamond or something. And I'm just gonna rotate it here 45 degree and scale it a bit here on the X, or actually on the Y axis, not the X. And I want to make an editable poly out of that. Take that polygon that we have here and scale it a bit here, universally on all axes. Just a tiny bit, so that it's not just this perfect box, but it actually already has a little bit more of this gemstone kind of a look. So I'm gonna go over to Effect Pivot, put it to 0 on the X-axis, so that once we add our symmetry modifier on it, we can then also have this piece here on the other side. And don't worry that all that looks very strange so far. This is gonna change once we have it in ZBrush where we make the high poly. So pretty much as the last thing, I want to take that stripe here at the front, collapse all, and then I'm gonna attach them all together here, these stripes, so that in ZBrush it will come in as one element pretty much, which is nice to work with then. I'm gonna center the pivot here. Make sure it's 0 and 0 on Z and X. And now I want to do the same thing here for these leather stripes at the back. Gonna select the first one, collapse all, and then I'm gonna use attach. We don't want to attach that metal piece here in the center, but there is one under it. So I'm gonna zoom in here and also attach that one. And basically that's it here. That's our block out. It's not very pretty. I'm just gonna also put the pivot to the center. It's not the prettiest block out, but it also doesn't have to be. The most important thing is it's functional. And now we can work with that in ZBrush. I'm gonna export. And I want to go over here to OBJ. ZBrush likes OBJs. And I have my ZBrush folder here. I already have a test export here that I just made. And I'm just going to replace it. We can just leave all these settings here and hit export. And I'm gonna see you guys in ZBrush, where we're gonna make some nice high poly sword out of it.